Hi, welcome to another Retvlog. Now, before I get on to the main course, which is about Holy Power Spenders for Battle for Azeroth, I'm going to go over a couple of notices first of all. So, I've got hankering to do another live Ret Q&A, and I'm going to be doing that next week. I'm not necessarily going to do it at the normal day and time. I may, I don't know yet. So I'm going to give details out of that hopefully in the next couple of days. When that'll be, I'll put notifications on Twitter, on Facebook, and on the YouTube communities tab for the channel. So make sure you're following me on at least one of those three if you want to be notified of that one. And the second one, so what did someone do? Someone put a comment. More Ret vids. Well, this is one of them. Show some selfless healer in action. No, it's I did a whole video on Selfless Healer. It's not easy to do a whole video on Selfless Healer. And the other thing is, at the moment in BFA, Word of Glory is really good. I'm using Word of Glory. I was using Justicar's Vengeance, just obviously for solo leveling. It's really good for that. But for reasons I shall come on to, I'm now using Word of Glory. It's actually quite distressing because I'm also using Word of Glory live on our Mythic Argus progress, and occasionally using it when I think either myself or anyone else is a bit dodgy just before a big load of damage goes out. And it's quite sad because it does much less damage in live than it's doing on the BFA. Word of Glory is much better on BFA. So anyway, bye-bye to that one. So what I've done is various bits of tuning been taking place. So when I first got into the alpha, in particular, if you look at, so baseline, obviously, we've got Templar's Verdict, Divine Storm in terms of damage dealing Holy Power Spenders. In addition, via talents, you've also got Execution Sentence, although the main benefit of that is the debuff it puts on, but it does do damage as well. And then there's Justicar's Vengeance, which is in the healing line, and it's supposed to be a heal. But, you know, there were situations in which it was worth using as a damage dealing ability. It did more damage than Templar's Verdict. Now, it wasn't as Holy Power efficient, so you wouldn't just use your Holy Power on Justicar's Vengeance because you'd be doing less damage overall, but it was worth using first of all on Divine Purpose procs. It just automatically used Justicar's Vengeance because it does straight up more damage, and secondly on a stun target. Now that's been nerfed a bit for BFA. It only does 50% extra damage, but nonetheless, that's, you know, it made that worthwhile. But now it's been changed a little bit. So I'm just going to go through some of the things. Now, the first thing I wanted to do is the debuffs that go on things are fairly important. So we've got different debuffs. We've got Judgment. Judgment still in BFA applies a debuff. It's just that it's a debuff that's consumed as soon as we use a spender. So if I use Judgment on a target, it gets a Judgment debuff. If I then use a Templar's Verdict, it benefits from that debuff, but then the debuff goes away. So it doesn't work for like a window or anything like that. Now, that debuff doesn't work with Mastery anymore because we've got better Mastery now. Hooray. What it does is it means that that spender's going to do 25% extra damage. But then there's other ones as well. So Execution Sentence, for example, puts a debuff on a target, which means it takes an extra 20% holy damage. This one doesn't, strictly speaking, have to be used on spenders. It will work on anything that does holy damage. So that includes Judgment. But more about that later. But the key thing is we're talking about Templar's Verdict. It does holy damage. It also happens to be a spender. So the first thing I had to do was just check, is it additive or, you know, multiplicative? Obviously, you would expect multiplicative with these buffs. So if it does, you know, 25% extra damage with Judgment debuff, 20% extra damage with the Execution Sentence debuff, you would expect that to be 50% extra damage with both up. So what I was doing was I just ran a test on Training Dummy on the BFA Alpha, just to sort of check that the values were doing the same thing, you know. And it did. It sort of all works there. So that's all fine. That's okay. So what I had a look at is the damage that each of these abilities is doing. So first of all, just in terms of baseline abilities. Templar's Verdict with the gear I have at the moment. Now, the gear I have on BFA Alpha, I'm level 119. That's the cap at the moment on the BFA Alpha. And I've got gear which, remember, everything's squished, including item level. So I've got 263 item level gear. That is the equivalent of nearly 1,000 item level in today's money. So Templar's Verdict's doing 4,118 damage baseline. Divine Storm 1647, but we'll come on to Cleave next. Justicar's Vengeance 3922, and then Execution Sentence itself 4315. So Execution Sentence does the most damage. It does slightly more damage than the Templar's Verdict, but of course the benefit of that is the debuff. They all cost 3 holy power apart from Justicar's Vengeance, which does 5. So when we look at the damage per holy power spent for the efficiency there, I mean, we don't even need to do these anymore because Justicar's Vengeance does straight up less. So we know that it's going to do less per holy power as well, and we can see that it's basically worthless. Justicar's Vengeance compared to Templar's Verdict is nowhere, so there's no point in even really looking at that, but I'm going to anyway. So then we look at damage with Judgment, and then the damage per holy power there, damage with Execution Sentence, and then damage with Judgment plus Execution Sentence. So obviously we don't do that for Execution Sentence itself. We can't possibly have the Execution Sentence debuff on a target when we can use Execution Sentence again, because the debuff lasts for 12 seconds. Execution Sentence has a cooldown of 30 seconds, which is not affected by haste. But what I wanted to know is, are there any situations under which Justicar's Vengeance can be used for damage purposes? Now, Blizzard wouldn't want it, so I'm sort of fairly sure they would retune things if that ever became the case. But I thought I would investigate anyway. So, Justicar's Vengeance, first of all, on a stunned mob, because that's where it's going to be useful. So, in a solo situation, can we use it for damage purposes on a stunned mob? So, Templar's Verdict does, 4118 baseline, which doesn't change, of course, on a stunned target. Justicar's Vengeance on a stunned target does 5883. So that's more damage. But in terms of damage per holy power, it's still less than Templar's Verdict. So we still wouldn't use it for damage purposes even on a stunned target. We could, however, if we took Divine Purpose, use it on a Divine Purpose proc, provided that it was stunned. But then you're sort of looking for a situation where you get a Divine Purpose proc, you'll need to stun the mob first and then use it in order for it to be worthwhile. So with a Divine Purpose proc, not worth it for the damage. With a stunned mob, but without a Divine Purpose proc, not worth it for the damage. So what Blizzard want of this is that it is just a heal. And that's pretty much what they've done with it at the moment. It is just a heal. So, and if I tried it with the debuffs as well, just to see if anything happened at all. Because obviously with Justicar's Vengeance doing more damage on a stunned mob, then that means that the difference in damage between Templar's Verdict and Justicar's Vengeance would increase if I buffed them both by another 50%. But what we can see here is that in terms of damage per holy power spent, it's 2,059 for a Templar's Verdict, but it's 1,765 for Justicar's Vengeance. So even on a stunned target, although it'll do more baseline damage, which is why you can use it on the DP proc, you wouldn't just use it without that. So Justicar's Vengeance, think of it this way, is a heal that costs holy power. Simple as that. It's a heal that costs holy power. And that's all there is to that one. And at the moment, you know, I'm not even using it for that because I'm finding Word of Glory to be more useful. For a start, Justicar's Vengeance, if you get yourself into trouble in a solo situation, you need to use it. Again, to give yourself a bigger heal, you're going to need to stun the mob. But and as well as judge the target, and preferably have Execution Sentence as well, but all that might be asking a bit. But you've also got to have 5 holy power. Whereas with Word of Glory, you only need 3 holy power. And you don't have to, there's nothing else you have to do to maximize the heal it'll do. If you've got 3 holy power, you just use it and it does a decent amount of healing. And you don't need to judge a target for anything like that. You can do it well away from, you can do it while you're running away, as long as you've got those 3 holy power. The downside to Word of Glory, of course, is it's still on that 1 minute recharge time. Yes, you get 2 charges, but 1 minute recharge time. Which means you can't spam it. Justicar's Vengeance, in theory, you could just keep spamming it. Build yourself to 5 holy power, use it again. Build yourself to 5 holy power, use it again. But in terms of what I've found useful, whether I'm taking on a pack where I've bitten off more than I can chew, or whether I'm taking on a very tough elite mob, I'm finding Word of Glory still to be better than Justicar's Vengeance at the moment. So at the moment, I'm struggling to see a situation where I would advise Just Cause Vengeance. But, as I say, the tuning hasn't finished yet. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one. Now, what's really important, of course, is for cleave situations. When do we use Divine Storm? And do other talents have an effect on that? So, they've already said, and I did the video, remember, on class design philosophies, and that applies to all classes, that Blizzard don't want two-target cleave, apart from their 3 specialist specs, and we are not one of them. So don't imagine that there's going to come a point where you can Divine Storm through 2 targets, and there's a benefit to do that. There's no benefit in doing that at all, damage-wise. So what we're going to do instead is have a look at how many targets it takes. So what I've done here again, I've done the Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm damage on, you know, from 1 to 5 targets. You can see here you get to the point where on 3 targets Divine Storm does enough damage to be worth it. So, you know, and that's what Blizzard are sort of suggesting, that everyone should be able to switch to AoE at 3+ targets, but no one apart from Arms Warriors, Frost Mages and Destruction Warlocks should be able to get benefit from, you know, or do a lot of 2-target cleave. But there are things that could affect it. So, for example, what happens when we put Judgment on? Now, Judgment, I would like it to be a buff, but it's a debuff. So that means, obviously, you put your debuff on that. All of your Templar's Verdict damage is buffed by that 25%. But if you put Judgment, use Judgment in an AoE situation, and use Divine Storm, only the target that was debuffed with the Judgment is going to get the 25% extra damage from the Divine Storm. So what happens here? So we can see on 1 target, the Templar's Verdict, of course, does more than double the damage of a Divine Storm. On 2 targets, it still does a lot more. On 3 targets, Divine Storm does win, but only very slightly. But it does still win. So the good news there is, even when we've used Judgment, we can still use Divine Storm on 3 targets. It's just that there's not very much in it. And that would also mean if we were putting other debuffs into the mix, we might be in a situation where it wouldn't. So, for example, if we put Execution Sentence on as well, actually that's not going to be a benefit. So if I've got Judgment and I'm using Execution Sentence, and I've got Execution Sentence on there, I'm not going to use Divine Storm on 3 targets, because, you know, I'm better off focusing that single target until the Execution Sentence debuff has gone away, and there we are. So then we look at a situation. So you think to yourself, well, Execution Sentence is just a single target debuff. So, well, in a situation where you've got, you know, you're going to have multiple ads, you probably wouldn't take that talent, right? The issue is that that first row is all single target stuff. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter what we take, really. Righteous Vengeance is also something that's going to favour Templar's Verdict. Again, we're not going to use Divine Storm on 3 targets if we've got Righteous Vengeance. Zeal, although that doesn't stop us using Divine Storm on 3 targets, we would, you know, in that case. I mean, are we going to take that just because it allows us to use Divine Storm on 3 targets? Overall, we might still do more damage by taking one of the other 2 talents. So there could be a situation where we don't use Divine Storm on 3 targets. Now, then we counter with another row, that because that's a pure single target row. We do have an AoE-ish row. Now, I take Wake of Ashes on that quite a bit. But there is also Divine Judgment. Now, what that does is you use Divine Storm and it buffs your next Judgment by an amount, you like 10%, per target hit. So if I hit 3 targets, then that means my next Judgment's going to do 30% extra damage. Judgment does quite a lot of damage. So there might be a benefit, even with something like Execution Sentence, in using Divine Storm and then, you know, using Judgment straight after it. So what we're going to do is look at the numbers on that one. So if I amend my talents a little bit and I take Divine Judgment, but I still have Execution Sentence, then what I can see here is my Judgment does 4413 baseline. So the idea would be in an AoE type situation, I'm just going to use this, not 3 targets here unfortunately. but it doesn't matter about the numbers I'm actually going to get here. So I want to use execution sentence, and then I use judgment after it, you know, to be doing my normal rotation single target. So the question becomes, when I use Divine Storm, all of a sudden my next judgment is going to go up. So you can see there 5295. That's because there were 2 targets present. So what would the issue be if I used execution sentence? I'm just going to wait for that execution sentence to come off cooldown. And I didn't use my judgment straight away. I used a Divine Storm, and then I used my judgment, because that's going to do more damage because of the Divine Storm, because of that talent. So in that situation, would I? And what it turns out is, so if I've got 3 targets and I've got execution sentence, so I use execution sentence and then I use judgment, I build up to 3 holy power. Do I Divine Storm or do I Templar's Verdict? Well, the numbers show that what I should do is Templar's Verdict, because that execution sentence debuff means it's tipping it over the edge. But if I've got the Divine Judgment buff here, the talent, what do I do then? Well, now I can see that the numbers suggest if I've got the execution sentence debuff on my primary target and I've got the judgment debuff on my primary target, just say, and I come to want to use another judgment next, obviously judgment's not available just yet, but storing up for it, it actually suggests what I should do is use Divine Storm, because although I'm going to do less damage now, when that judgment next comes off cooldown, it's going to do more. Now, reality, what you would want to do to get the best of both worlds is when you're using your execution sentence, what you would want to do is to judge Templar's Verdict. I used Divine Storm there by mistake. But then use a Divine Storm quickly before your judgment comes off cooldown, and then use judgment, and you should get the best of both worlds. I'm going to try and do that a little bit better this time. Just wait for execution sentence to come off cooldown. So execution sentence, judge, Templar's Verdict. Do that again. Divine Storm. If I can use another Divine Storm, all the better. Now I can do judgment and hopefully get the best of all situations. But it is quite tricky doing that in the window with the execution sentence. That's not making it easy. I'm just going to wait one more time. Let's see if we can try and do this a bit quicker. Bear in mind, of course, I can't take Wake of Ashes in order to do this. So, Templar's Verdict. Divine Storm. It's really finicky, right? I couldn't get another Divine Storm off, but I could just about get a Judgment off before the Execution Sentence debuff fell off. It is quite tight there. Now, with more haste, of course, that will get a lot easier. If you look here, because I'm leveling, I've got increasingly less haste. I've only got 13% haste. So, if we can end up with a much higher amount of haste, once we've leveled to 120, we'll start to get our gear. And it's quite likely we're going to want haste, because apart from anything else, this GCD nonsense that Blizzard are doing is going to, of course, I mean, our haste value is going to be reasonable anyway, but that's going to increase the value of our haste anyway. So we're likely to be, I don't want to say as strong as chasing haste, but we are likely to favour haste quite a bit. So that might be a lot easier because the debuff window, remember, lasts 12 seconds for execution sentence. That's not reduced by haste because that would be laughable. So in actual fact, by then, it could well be the case that we can, you know, use that judgment, execution sentence, judgment, use a Templar's Verdict to get the best out of that. And then, you know, a couple of Divine Storms before our next judgment becomes available should also work pretty well as well. But of course, that's a situation where we've got execution sentence, but we've got mobs to cleave on as well. Execution sentence, generally speaking, may well be one of those that we primarily want to use in single target only situations. So I also just recorded a little bit about how I'm using that in the BFA with Wake of Ashes, just to highlight what my sort of priority is for using that there. I recorded this actually before the bit just before, but you know, here it is. So as you can see here, I've taken Execution Sentence. I've also taken Wake of Ashes. At the moment, that would be the obvious one to take in a single target situation. Although if they change Divine Judgment to work with Templar's Verdicts, then you never know. But what I'm going to do now, there is an issue. Obviously, what I want to do is with Execution Sentence, as soon as I use it, I've got 12 seconds to spend as much holy damage or deal as much holy damage as possible. Most of that's going to be in spenders, of course. Templar's Verdict does a lot of that. Blade of Justice, although it does a lot of damage, it's physical damage, so I'm not really getting much joy out of that. But Judgment itself, of course, is a holy damage dealer. And for that reason, what I want to do is when I build up holy power, I don't want to use my Judgment on the Execution Sentence itself. So even if I've got Judgment available, you want to use Judgment pretty quickly when it's available, as you do in live. But I want to use it when the Execution Sentence debuff is already on. So the general thing here would be to get 3, spend the Execution Sentence, then use a Judgment. That didn't actually... Oh, this is because it's a training dummy, so that one didn't work ideally there. Wake of Ashes to use a few. There's not as many spenders as I'd normally be able to do. Bear in mind, I'm missing the odd one here because, you know, I'm not level cap and I'm on a training dummy here. We'll maybe give this another go from behind just in case that was an issue. Wait for Execution Sentence to come off. Now, Wake of Ashes is still not on cooldown. I mean, this is one of the issues with Wake of Ashes, of course, having a different cooldown to Execution Sentence. Otherwise, the combination would be very powerful. I strongly suspect the reason they've done that is deliberate, to stop you being able to use Wake of Ashes every time you've got Execution Sentence available. Whether it's worthwhile delaying your Execution Sentence so you always have it with Wake of Ashes, I don't know. If it ever seemed to be the case that that was true, I imagine Blizzard would do something about it, because for me, what's the reason why Wake of Ashes has to be 45 seconds? I mean, we've got it 30 seconds in Legion Live. I think it's just to stop it lining up with things like this, to be honest, with Execution Sentence, because they do go very well together. So those are just some thoughts as to spending Holy Power in Battle for Azeroth as it's looking now. If you've got any particular comments, again, put those down below. And as I say, next week at some point, details to follow, we'll be doing a live Ret Q&A and people can ask all sorts of questions there as well. And of course, if you want to ask questions in the meantime, then by all means join me on stream. I'm just about to have to try and edit this really quickly and go on stream this afternoon. Obviously, there's streaming every day in some format or other. At the moment, at any rate, I'm not saying that's always going to carry on. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you liked it. If you did, don't forget to actually give it a proper like. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.